Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Finca El Arrollo wash processed Guatemala from Stamp Act Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Stamp Act Coffee based out of Seattle, Washington, and this is their first time appearing on the channel. It's also a wonderful opportunity for us to discuss the Seattle coffee scene a little further, as for anybody that might not know, the channel was started when we were based out of the heart of Seattle, Washington, so we have a lot of familiarity with the Seattle coffee scene. We feel like a lot of that information is extremely relevant towards this coffee roaster in particular. So one of the first things we wanted to address is this notion of Seattle being America's coffee city, and a lot of that can be attributed to the fact that Starbucks is based out of Seattle, Washington, of course. But outside of that, people might see Seattle as a more modern, progressive coffee city, when the reality is Seattle still is stuck a little bit in the past when it comes to coffee, as outside of Starbucks, the biggest names in the city are probably places like Vivace, Umbria, and Ladro, which are all second wave, dark roasted, espresso-based coffee roasters, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But I think if you ask most people outside of Seattle to name a Seattle-based coffee roaster, third wave Seattle-based coffee roaster, the names that probably come up are places like Slate and Kuma, which in themselves are pretty reputable names, but at the same time, they don't have the same sort of reach and magnitude as a place like Hart or Stumptown or so many other coffee roasters in the United States do. That's where Stamp Act comes into play, as the name behind Stamp Act Coffee insinuates out with the old and in with the new, as they wanted to introduce this kind of lighter roasted profile to the Seattle coffee scene, as there still aren't too many third wave coffee roasters that have gained a pretty strong foothold in the city. Between them and Looking Homeward, those are two coffee roasters that have sprouted up within the last couple of years that are focusing on this third wave kind of less developed coffee, and we very much welcome it, as we very much want to have Seattle introduce some coffees that can compete with some other coffees throughout the United States, throughout the world. So it was a great opportunity for us to review their coffee. We discovered them a couple years ago at a cafe, a multi-roaster cafe in the city, and found out a little bit more information about the coffee roaster, and it was started by a former barista that lived in the city of Seattle as well. So they have a lot of familiarity with the Seattle coffee scene, and yeah, we're very much looking forward to discussing this coffee. This right here is day 17. And recipe we used for this coffee was a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 200 degrees Fahrenheit through the Chemex. And as mentioned, they wanted to focus on the lighter side of things, but even then, this probably still was a little bit more of a light medium American for the roast profile. This coffee right here was actually brewed through the automatic coffee maker. We wanted to note that, as well as we wanted to see if we might get something different from it through that method. And let's go ahead and start discussing the coffee. All right, day 6, which was our first impression. The coffee was slightly sweeter than expected, which is always a positive. There was quite a bit of this caramel sweetness to it, but the most prominent thing in this coffee was this super strong herbal component, and they have listed on here, I believe it's rose specifically, yeah, just rose. And that's going to be the theme throughout this video, is this rose flavor note. It's not necessarily what we experience with a lot of Hart coffees, as it's a very kind of clear rose water. This one right here was a very herbal thing that you could probably most closely align with a rose, but it was a very different sort of rose. Day 7 went back, and again, we're emphasizing this really strong herbal component in this coffee. Very noticeable, very strong, more of a heavy floral with a lot of Central American characteristics. And this coffee was extremely consistent, so these notes are going to be pretty repetitive. As day 8, chocolate and caramel sweetness. That's what we're getting the most of. That's where most of the sweetness is coming from. And again, this ever-present herbal florality. Day 10, getting a little bit more depth in the cup of coffee, as there was an ever so slight bit of stone fruit as the coffee was cooling down, but again, pretty strong herbal taste in this cup. Very strong herbal taste throughout. Day 12, that's when we started messing around with a lot of things, including the temperature, and we felt the coffee was significantly better as the temperature was lowered in this case. Slightly sweeter, the herbal nature of the coffee settled down a little bit, and that's the biggest reason why we liked lowering the temperature. The herbal kind of florality that was very strong in this cup at higher temperatures when you're increasing the extraction was super strong, so lowering the temperatures was a nice change. And day 13, coffee, a fair bit of pleasant sweetness still, and we're emphasizing the Central American characteristics, specifically the Guatemalan characteristics, caramel and chocolate. Even though they don't have those flavor notes listed on here, they were definitely present. Floral component still present, still the most pronounced thing in this cup of coffee. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. All right, and we have two things at level 4, so let's discuss those first. Finish, yeah, it has a very lasting finish. And the very lasting finish is that herbal florality that we've been discussing a lot throughout this video, and that's also why the savory is at a level 3. As mentioned, it's not as crisp, clean and straightforward of this rose, but kind of more of a savory sort of florality. So that's why those are the two things that are pretty high on this tasting wheel. Acidity level 2, cleanliness level 3, as yeah, we might have expected that to be a little higher, but level 3 is where we put it. A little bit of smokiness that has since dissipated when we brewed it through the automatic coffee maker. I feel like the coffee is actually better through the automatic coffee maker. Bitterness level 2, I'm probably closer to about a 2.5, truth be told. Chocolate, caramel level 3, and they have listed on here honeydew and peach, and throughout the time drinking this coffee, those were never ever overly present notes. You could kind of get a little bit of those flavors very subtly, but they were never going to be as overly pronounced as the floral was, as that herbal florality was super dominant in this cup of coffee. And I feel like with the higher temperatures on earlier days, we might even be able to push that up to a level 5 and maybe push the savoriness to a level 4, as that really strong herbal component probably could have justified both higher marks for this tasting wheel. But honestly, other than that, I actually like the way that this tasting wheel looks a little bit more. All right, our overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. It wasn't quite what we were expecting. And that being said, we love rose, we love peach, we love honeydew, and we love Guatemalan coffees. So in theory, this coffee was supposed to be everything that we were looking for. But the reality was it was a little bit more skewed in one direction than we were expecting. And the direction that it had been skewed wasn't necessarily the direction that we had preferred, given that it wasn't as kind of clean of a rose as we were hoping for. So that being said, it wasn't our favorite coffee, but we had been dying to try something from Stamp Act, and this isn't going to be the last time we try something from Stamp Act, as we do kind of want to compare a lot of Seattle coffee roasters to see which one's doing really well, which one's getting better, and all of those sort of things. And Stamp Act, as of right now, is probably in the higher tier of Seattle coffee roasters. So the type of person we would suggest this coffee to is somebody that does like a super herbal florality, specifically that rose. Can definitely see a lot of similar characteristics in that, and a lot of these Central American characteristics too. The sweetness was coming from typical Central American coffees, chocolate, caramel, and that's to be expected. So overall, that's the type of person we would suggest this coffee to, but for the most part, I think we're going to leave this review at that. If you have by chance had an opportunity to try anything from Stamp Act Coffee, we would love to know your thoughts and impressions of them or it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But this right here has been a review of the Finca El Arrollo wash processed Guatemala from Stamp Act Coffee. Thank you for watching.